Hello everybody, welcome back to the Tin Man's Corner channel. I'm your host Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today I'll be reading a chapter out of the Bigfoot Terror Tales Vol.1, and the story is called Witiko. That's Witiko. And the story is by Bruce Durham. Without further ado, let's get on with the story, shall we? The York boat surged over a large, white-capped wave, its wooden frame groaning. A speck on the waters of James Bay, the shallow craft labored under the clouds, the color of volcanic ash that coiled like some primordial snake. Lightning danced across the distant shoreline, chased by drums of rolling thunder. Captain Thomas Douglas sat afoot, white-knuckled hands clutching a wooden bench, rivulets of the water streaming off his clean-shaven face. An officer of the 35th Regiment of Foot, the Prince of Orange's own, he was at once enthralled and terrified by the storm-sheer display of primeval fury. Man, that guy sounds tough to me, but anyway. He tightened his grip as another monstrous wave reared. The boat heaved, was tossed high into the air, then fell as the wave rolled past. The sensation of weightlessness, unnerving before it struck the water with a solid smack. Douglas cursed, more an expression of relief. A sharp bark of laughter had him look over his shoulder. Midshipman Matthias Leaf returned the look with barely concealed dread. Lashed to the bench, his muscular arms bulged with Herculean effort as he struggled with the side-mounted rudder. A second man sat beside him, watching bermusously. His thick arms were casually crossed. His blond beard and long hair limped across broad shoulders. Again he laughed, a bellow as deep as the percent thunder. The men turned green. Leaf see them clutch their oars like frightened children. Leaf glared through the sheeting rain. These men are soldiers, not seasoned sailors, you Scottish goat. Scottish goat, really? That's a weird name, but anyway. But this is just a stiff breeze. Look at them, children hugging their mothers' skirts, pissing at the first sight of a storm cloud. And here I thought you English were masters of the seas. Oh man, we got some trouble name calling already, but anyway. Douglas shook his head and swiped at the salty spray lashing his face. You are full of bluster as usual, McNabb. I will wager a month's pay you pray for land just like we do. The midshipman cut in, gesturing starboard. The prevailing winds continued from the northwest. We will be sore pressed to maintain our heading. The men tired quickly. The winds would change soon enough. McNabb stated that we can lay sail. The men may rest their wee souls once we reach land. The Scot leaned close to Douglas and said in a surprisingly somber tone, in truth, these boats alarm me. They are for navigating rivers and not crossing a hell-spawned bay. Let us pray that this mission is nothing more than the fool's errand. Douglas nodded in agreement. Their fool's errand was a trade post on the southwest coast of James Bay near Akimiski Island. The rest of the trappers were 3 weeks past due, delivering a consignment of furs. Concerned with profit loss, the company factor at Fort Albany had dispatched 2 York boats to investigate, each piloted by a midshipman from the recently arrived Prince Rupert. Captain Douglas, stationed at the fort, was directed to lead the expedition and assess the situation. Initial suspicion evoked a band of renegade Cree and French traders. Douglas selected a complement of 16 soldiers from his command. Alexander McNabb, a company clerk, was added to oversee company interests. Now, 2 days out of Fort Albany, they braved the storm on the final leg of their voyage. True to McNabb's word, the winds died and waters calmed. Angry clouds thinned into wispy rose-tinged ribbons. The sun appeared low on the horizon, bathing the cold blue surface in a reflective sheen. Douglas gave the order to raise oars. The boat coasted to a gentle rest. Wordless, his men collapsed where they sat, though some harder souls fell to chewing hardtack rummage from their kits. Leaf and McNabb expected for damage. Their constant bickering provided the weary soldiers no shortage of entertainment. Repairs proved unnecessary. A half hour later, a cry from Leaf brought heads about. The second boat was just a few hundred feet to port. Soon both vessels joined, and Leaf conversed briefly with his counterpart, a man named Benson. They informed Douglas they were fit for travel. Douglas was nudged awake. "You should see this, sir," said his second-in-command, Sergeant Goff. Having gathered some much-needed rest, Douglas grunted and sat, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He realized dawn was not far off. Leaf and McNabb were already awake and attentive, peering beyond him to port. Following their gaze, he spotted a glow on the far shore, its rusty color dancing across the silver-crested bay waters. It flickered brightly, then faded into a dull blush before flaring again. McNabb said, "Fire!" Leaf frowned. "The forest." The company clerk shook his head. "Too local. Could be the outpost." Douglas cleared his throat. Then we steer for it, Mr. Leaf." The men groaned when awakened in order to take up oars. As dawn broke, the fire had dwindled to a smoldering cloud of gray smoke drifting lazily across an expanse of mesquite populated with pockets of poplar and black spruce. I don't think I never heard of black spruce, but anyway. A wooden dock and 2 beach canoes confirmed the outpost location. The York boats ground onto the coarse sand. Men leaped the gunwales to wade through shallow, cold water, running these vessels up the beach until free of the gently lapping waves. Captain Douglas stepped onto the beach and examined his musket silently, cursing the moist air. Misfires were a distant possibility under this pestilent cold and blistery climate. McNabb critically eyed the weapon. "The Cree are friendly, Captain. Don't go shooting everything that moves." Douglas shouldered the brown bess and quickly inspected his bayonet before slamming the weapon home in its metal scabbard. "I have soldiered far too long to assume anything, McNabb." Sweeping the murky landscape, he said, "I will leave you with 2 men. Expect us by evening at the latest." Nodding farewell to McNabb, Leaf, and Benson, Captain Douglas joined 14 veteran soldiers standing some distance inland, their heavy wool capote coats drawn tight over their white trousers and red jackets. Goff approached Douglas and said, "We found the remains of the outpost." He pointed beyond a stand of poplars to a series of smoldering wooden stubs. Wasn't hard to locate. Douglas frowned. "We will begin there. Have the men search the ruins, turn stones, poke at anything remotely suspicious." Goff gave the order, and the men set to. Before long, a soldier called out. Douglas joined a man resting on his launchers beside a patch of churned ground, casually flipping a small object in one dirt-crushed hand. Near his feet lay a half-buried musket. Douglas kneeled and scraped at the remaining soil, unearthing it. Under the weapon was a broken ramrod. "Belongs to a trapper, my guess," Douglas said. "See those iron fittings? The wood ramrod, very old." Glancing at the object in the soldier's hand, he asked, "What is that?" The man handed over a torn paper cartridge. "Found more of them leading inland." "Sir, looks like some kind of running fight. Lots of footprints, too. Something definitely happened here." Douglas stood and discovered Leaf and Benson hovering close by. McNabb several paces behind. "We saw your men rummaging about and figured we offer help." Leaf explained before Douglas had a chance to speak. He passed over the cartridge. "Appears the outpost was attacked." Looking at McNabb, he said, "You're sure your swampy Cree are peaceful?" McNabb stroked his blond beard. "I cannot vouch for all, Captain, but they seldom gave us trouble. Our dealings are generally uneventful and prosperous." Douglas stared into the marsh, his eyes picking out the trail of footprints. "We shall continue inland and see what we find." Toward noon, Douglas gave them command to rest, and a camp was established along the windy crest of a bowl-shaped caldera, its gentle slope leading to a field of pier split by two large ponds. The caldera formed the center of a rocky plateau. A slab of granite a mere mile and a half long was a steep incline that made for a slow ascent. The trail had taken them through dark and muddy, musky, with a few signs of animal life and less of human habitation. Though they were far from alone. Horse and deer flies and tiny black flies swarmed relentlessly about the party, searching out patches of exposed skin and irritating the men to no end. Yeah, I hate it when they do that. Douglas suspected the tale of trappers eaten alive by these insects was no folklore, but on the plateau, the wind kept insects at bay, and he found solace on a flat rock. His heavy capote laying beside him, staring back along their route. His mood grew surly. Beyond the meager evidence discovered at the outpost, their search had revealed nothing of importance. Two bodies blocked the sun's negligible warmth. Guff and a soldier named Blake. Mildly irritated at the eruption, Douglas asked, What is it?" "Go on, Guff," prodded the veteran. Blake was wide and muscular, with a square face, deep-set eyes, and graying hair. Hastily, he said, "I thought I heard something, sir, on the far side of the ridge. Figured it best to report in case it was a Cree war party or something." Douglas stood. He curiously aroused. "Show me." The veteran led them around the lip of the caldera and stopped before a partially hidden descending path of age-worn steps. Exchanging looks with Gulf, Douglas urged the veteran forward. They proceeded carefully down the path, Blake leading, their gloved hands braced against the cliff wall. The way was narrow and treacherous. A strong, swirling wind threatened every step. They reached a wide ledge and stood a long moment, admiring an expansive view of the surrounding landscape. Gulf gasped. Douglas and Blake turned. The sergeant stared at something against the cliff wall. "Is that human?" I'll probably say it's a Bigfoot or something. Douglas felt a shiver crawl along his spine. "I think so." Propped against the stone was a torso, its brown, leathered skin stretched taut over a withered frame. Bleached bone jutted from the shoulders and hips. A survivor of several horrific battles, Douglas had never witnessed anything quite as unnerving as this. Okay, we haven't got to Bigfoot yet. This is a victim. Dropping to his haunches beside the amalgamate trunk, he noted flecks of dry blood on the exposed bone. Glancing along the cliff ledge, he said, "No head, arms, or legs. No decomposition." He stood. Not surprising, I suppose, given the weather. My guess is he was a swampy Cree. Blake was ghastly pale. Who on earth would desecrate a body like that, Captain? Douglas shrugged. He noticed Goff staring at some point further along the ledge. What is it, Sergeant? I see a cave, sir. Shall I investigate? Douglas glanced at the torso and then at the sky, growling thick with clouds. We have come this far with little to show. Perhaps this cave will provide answers. Carefully traversing the ledge, they stopped before a four-body entrance. Douglas was immediately drawn to a series of marks gouged into the stone on either side of the dark opening. He traced his finger along one of them. What do you make of that? Goff and Blake inspected the score and shrugged. All right, I'm going to stop it here and go directly to a part 2. So don't you go anywhere.